Since assuming power, Captain Ibrahim Traore has been actively diversifying Burkina Faso's relationships with other countries. This has resulted in significant gains not only for his country, but also for the entire African continent. In the past, when Western countries assisted in African nations, it was often labeled as aid or charity. They would publicize their generosity to showcase themselves as prominent benefactors. African countries, dependent on food and financial aid, had no choice but to express gratitude for the help received. However, they lacked genuine allies and friends who could provide support without seeking recognition. Under Captain Ibrahim Traore's leadership, Burkina Faso has established strong ties with Russia. This move has inspired other African nations to diversify their alliances. Russia's commitment to offering free grain to 6 African countries, without branding it as aid or charity, was a significant promise. The West criticized this pledge, doubting its fulfillment. Nevertheless, with the shipment of grain to African countries, the skeptics in the West have been silenced. The question arises, why did President Putin offer free grain? And what is the nature of the burgeoning relationship between Russia and African countries? Let's explore these developments in this video. This year, the Russia-Africa Summit held in St. Petersburg witnessed the participation of 49 out of 55 African nations, a notable increase from the 43 nations present at the 2019 event. Despite facing criticism in the Western media, the actual outcomes of the summit present a different perspective from the one portrayed by Western media. Key agreements were reached, including the decision to hold future summits every 3 years and establish an annual Russia-Africa Parliamentary Forum. Regular political consultations between Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and the chairman of the African Union were initiated. Russia announced plans to expand its diplomatic presence in Africa by opening new embassies and consulates. Additionally, Russian media bureaus, including newspapers and radio programs, will be established. Discussions also focused on exploring the potential for providing African nations with visa-free access to Russia under specific categories. Russia and participating African countries committed to contributing to a more just, balanced, and stable multipolar world order, opposing any form of international confrontation. This consensus between African countries and Russia signifies a significant shift in their relationship. Unlike previous engagements with Russia, African countries are now actively involved in decision-making processes, demonstrating their agency and importance. Consequently, they have chosen to distance themselves from former colonial powers and forge closer ties with countries they deem significant. This stance directly challenges the Western model of a unipolar global regime led by the United States, indicating a shift within the African part of the global South away from the European Union. Russia has pledged support for Africa to have a voice on the United Nations Security Council and proposed full membership of the African Union as part of the G20. Regarding food security, discussions were held to explore ways to ensure stability in this area. Russia has outlined plans to increase its exports of food, fertilizers, vehicles, and industrial machinery to Africa. They aim to settle transactions in national currencies, including the ruble. Moscow intends to send both commercial and humanitarian grain shipments to several African nations, providing sustainable and affordable deliveries. It's important to note that the free grain is not a loan and does not address debt issues. In terms of debt relief, Russia has written off $23 billion of African debt and discussed allocating an additional $90 million to reduce the overall debt burden of African countries. In the energy sector, Russia has committed to assisting in the development of Africa's energy industry, including green energy, power plants, and even nuclear facilities. Rosatom, the Russian nuclear energy corporation, will play a significant role in these developments. The World Health Organization participated in the summit, where Russia announced its commitment to investing 1.2 billion rubles in substantial support for healthcare systems throughout Africa. There was also a focus on the inclusion of several East African countries in the International North-South Transportation Corridor, INSTC. This corridor facilitates multimodal logistics and transport between the Caspian Sea and the Persian Gulf. Extending this corridor to Africa, with Egypt as a primary destination, aims to offer a more efficient trade route compared to the longer and costlier Suez Canal route. The summit also aimed to enhance trade, economic, and investment cooperation between Russia and African states. Collaboration with the African Union and regional organizations such as the Arab Maghreb Union, the Southern African Development Community, SADC, and the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, IGAD, was emphasized. Discussions on free trade agreements with the Eurasian Economic Union, especially with the SADC, were suggested. Russia recognized the operations of the African Continental Free Trade Area, acknowledging its benefits for Pan-African sourcing and manufacturing. The 2023 Russia-Africa Summit Declaration addressed various issues and outlined future intentions. Despite being dismissed in the West, the summit significantly bolstered relations between Russia and Africa. Some have raised concerns that it signifies a new alliance between African countries and Russia, potentially challenging the influence of the West on the global stage. However, it's important for African countries to focus on strengthening themselves internally before engaging in global affairs. Strong leadership is crucial for ensuring food and territorial security. Putin, the president of Russia, has blamed the West for failing to deliver grain to the world's poorest nations. He assured African countries that Russia could replace Ukrainian and UK grain free of charge due to an anticipated record harvest this year. Moscow has long sought to establish an alternative financial and commercial system independent of the West, particularly due to the sanctions imposed on Russia following its invasion of Ukraine. Africa is significant to Russia as it seeks new partnerships. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has made several trips to Africa since the invasion of Ukraine, emphasizing the importance of the continent. Despite Western media engaging in propaganda to disillusion African countries about Russia, Africa has the ability to judge things for itself. The 54 nations of Africa collectively form the largest voting bloc at the United Nations, and their stance on General Assembly resolutions critical of Russia's invasion has been more divided than any other region. Analysts suggest that if African nations had felt unheard at the summit, they would have distanced themselves from Russia. However, all African heads of state conveyed their satisfaction, particularly due to Putin's personal interest in helping Africa and becoming an important ally. The close relations between Russia and Africa are seen as a win-win situation. Russia can provide immediate help to African countries in urgent crises, while also assisting in their long-term industrial development. Since the departure of former colonial powers from Africa, the continent has remained dependent on other countries for finished products. Russia's manufacturing capabilities can help African countries achieve self-sufficiency and industrialization. Putin's assurance of providing free grain to low-income African countries demonstrates Russia's commitment to helping Africa in urgent crises like food security. This gesture can bring Russia closer to Africa and potentially lead to the formation of an alliance that differs from any seen before. Russia's connections with African nations can surpass those of the West due to historical ties and shared cultural principles. By preserving what's sacred instead of changing it, Russia and African countries can establish a unique bond. It's important for the US audience to understand the significance of Africa and the competition among global powers, including China, France, Turkey, Japan, and Britain, in investing in its stability. Africa's fast-growing demographic and economic power position it to shape the 21st century. It's becoming evident that the US and Europe are making significant efforts to engage and win Africa. However, African countries now recognize that Russia and China offer better options. Russia can provide security assistance, while China can bring remarkable economic benefits. African states would prefer to be influential decision-makers rather than getting caught in another proxy war. A smart approach would be to establish relations with all of these powers for maximum advantages. Putin's promises are now turning into reality. Russia has started delivering free shipments of grain to 6 African countries, including Burkina Faso, Somalia, Eritrea, Zimbabwe, Mali, and the Central African Republic. These shipments fulfill the promise made by President Putin after Russia withdrew from a UN-brokered grain deal with Ukraine. Putin highlighted Russia's historical support for African liberation movements and emphasized the country's long-standing ties to Africa. For Putin, offering free grain is just a small token of help that Russia can provide to Africa. However, Russia also aims to teach Africa how to be self-reliant in agriculture and industrialization. While immediate grain assistance is necessary, Russia understands the importance of helping African countries develop their own agriculture and grow their own crops. China is also making significant inroads in Africa as the continent's largest trade partner. They have pledged $60 billion in funding to African countries in 2018. In contrast, Russia's deals at the 2019 summit amounted to $12.5 billion, primarily in the form of non-binding memorandums of understanding. Some agreements focused on arms deals, appealing to authoritarian leaders in countries like Uganda and Zimbabwe. African experts caution African leaders to exercise caution when endorsing potentially problematic actions and deals. While the summit presents an opportunity for Russia to strengthen ties with African nations, it's important to note the uneven trade dynamics. Russia provides weaponry but contributes little to the everyday lives of African people in terms of goods or job opportunities through investments. African leaders should carefully consider the implications of such agreements. Currently, Russia is unable to exploit African countries in the same way European countries did in the past. Instead, Russia is focusing on investing in Africa. Russian businesses see investing in African countries as a strategic response to international sanctions and potential freezing of their assets. This investment benefits both parties involved. Russia has faced significant international sanctions primarily in response to actions like the annexation of Crimea and the conflict in Ukraine. These sanctions target Russian banks, businesses, and individuals associated with the government. As a result, Russia's access to global financial markets has been limited, impacting their international trade. To overcome these challenges, Russian businesses are actively seeking alternative markets and investment opportunities outside the jurisdictions affected by sanctions. Africa, with its growing economies and emerging markets, is an attractive option for diversification. According to the UN, Africa is the most profitable region in the world. Investing in African countries provides Russian businesses with a strategic avenue to protect their assets from potential freezing or seizure under international sanctions. By establishing a presence in regions less directly impacted by these sanctions, they aim to safeguard their investments and ensure uninterrupted operations. For African nations, Russian investment offers opportunities for strategic alliances and economic partnerships that are less influenced by geopolitical tensions leading to sanctions against Russia. Cultivating strong economic ties in Africa can provide Russian businesses with increased stability and resilience against the effects of global sanctions. Furthermore, Russian companies, especially those in the energy and mining sectors, are attracted to Africa's abundant natural resources. They can assist African countries in developing their industries and benefit from these resources. President Vladimir Putin has expressed his nation's commitment to promoting a multipolar world order and combating neocolonialism. This sentiment was shared during a summit in St. Petersburg, where African leaders and representatives from 49 countries signed a joint declaration advocating for a more just, balanced, and stable global order. The focus is on opposing various forms of international confrontation on the African continent. In summary, Russia's current approach in Africa involves investing in the continent as a strategic response to international sanctions. By doing so, Russian businesses aim to protect their assets, establish economic partnerships, and ensure uninterrupted operations. African countries can benefit from this investment by developing their industries and leveraging their abundant natural resources. The joint commitment to a multipolar world order and opposition to neocolonialism reflects the shared aspirations of Russia and African nations. It seems that both Russia and African countries are aligning themselves towards a multipolar world. For many years, Africa has been excluded from global affairs. However, now there is a shift happening, and major powers like Russia and China, as well as regional players like the United Arab Emirates, are making significant diplomatic and economic advances into the continent. This trend, known as the New Scramble for Africa, suggests that these powers are displacing the influence of traditional colonial powers such as Britain and France. Russia's presence in Africa is not a recent development, despite the narrative of the New Scramble. Countries like Ghana and Mali have a history of recalling the Soviet Union, led by Russia, as a powerful force against colonialism and oppression. Russia has provided economic and military support to socialist-leaning governments and militias during liberation wars. Over the years, Russia has maintained diplomatic relations with most African nations. In recent times, there has been an increase in Russian arms transfers to Africa, making up 40% of arms imported by African countries since 2018. Additionally, the state-sponsored Wagner mercenary group has become involved in countries like the Central African Republic and Sudan, providing military training and security in exchange for a share of profits. While China surpasses Russia in overall trade with Africa, Russia holds significant influence in the agricultural sector and has utilized disinformation campaigns to enhance its influence. This influence is visible in protests in countries like Chad and Mali, where Russian flags have been waved. Russia has also gained diplomatic support at the UN, with several African nations either opposing or abstaining from condemning Russia's actions in Ukraine. The combination of China and Russia seems to be working in Africa, potentially replacing the influence of European powers. As Putin fulfills his promise of offering free grain to African countries, analysts anticipate surprising agreements between Russia and African nations. African countries have been cautiously engaging with Russia to determine its reliability. After the first Russia-Africa summit and years of engagement, it is becoming clear that Russia may establish military and security deals with Africa to safeguard territorial integrity. While the West has criticized Russia for its lack of investment in Africa, it is expected that Russia will inject hundreds of billions of dollars into the continent. This raises questions about whether Russia can be a more reliable ally for African countries compared to Europe and the US. African leaders, like Captain Ibrahim Traore, must consider whether they should trust Putin and establish deeper ties with Russia. It remains to be seen how the West will react as Russia and Africa form a closer relationship. Please share your thoughts on whether Russia can be a reliable ally for African countries compared to Europe and the US, and what actions the West may take as this relationship develops. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it